joining us this evening. I'm on behalf of TechFest. I'm really pleased to welcome Laura Young, to the Scotland's Digital Science Festival, which is a brand new thing for us. Although we have done online before, Scotland's Digital Festival is quite new. So to introduce Laura Young, but you probably all know her more as Less Waste Laura. So Laura is a climate activist, an ethical influencer, and an environmental scientist. Laura has a first class honours degree in geography and environmental science, and she started her PhD in October 2022, which she does between Abertay University and Dundee University. So just to give a shout out there. But I think that the most impressive thing, Laura this year is the 2024 Scottish Influencer of the Year. So congratulations on that,
Thank
Laura.
you.
And if you're happy, I will. People haven't tuned in to listen to me, so I'll hand over to you if that's okay.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. No, it's wonderful to be with you, and to be speaking to people across Scotland and across Canada. So that's exciting. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. And I've got some slides that I'll share. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the work that I do, but then also about the campaign that I've run. And there will be loads of time for question and discussion at the end as well. So I'll share my slides, and you'll hopefully see those pop up any second now. And Wendy, if you could just, yep, we can see that. I will start with the slideshow.
Yep, that's all good.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. So my name's Laura. Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. And today I want to talk a little bit about campaigning, and particularly the disposable vapes campaign I've been involved in, but really using that as an example of how campaigning can look and some of the lessons learned, and some of the things that I've been involved in. Please do feel free in the chat to continue saying hello to one another, saying where you're from, and if you've got questions, you can put them in as we go. We'll do loads of questions at the end, so please don't feel you've got to try and remember them. You can pop them in the chat as we go. But a little bit more about me, just so you can get some understanding of the kind of work that I've been involved in and the journey I've been on. Is that I've really been passionate about the environment from a very young age. When I was at school, I absolutely loved the subject geography. I really enjoyed learning about the world, about how the world works, about the natural environment. And I also did something called Duke of Edinburgh, which we have here in the UK, where young people, normally around school age, can go out and go on expeditions and see parts of, in my case, it was all parts of Scotland. And it just really gave me an appreciation for the place that I am from, and the environment. But when you learn these subjects at school, and I then went on to university to do geography and environmental science, you don't just learn all of the amazing stuff, you also then learn about the way we're not treating the environment very well. So climate change, plastic pollution, these are all things that I think we all are aware of, but particularly when I was at university, I just felt a really strong calling towards wanting to work to try and help with some of these issues. So that was the kind of background academically and what I was doing around that time. But actually, when I was at university, so in 2018, I was doing my undergraduate, I was learning all of this stuff and seeing a lot of in the news as well. And we had documentaries, things like Blue Planet. I really started to think, what could I do, not just with my studies, but how could I, as an individual, just try and do my best to be a bit more sustainable? And that's when in 2018, I started a New Year's resolution to be more sustainable. I wasn't really sure what it would look like, but I thought I'll just go on a journey and see where it takes me. And some of these photographs are the kind of things I got up to. I would go to shops where you could get things plastic free. I would try and buy clothes secondhand. And I even did some organizing of litter picks around campus. And when I started this, I also started to document it. And that's where Less Waste Laura came from. It was originally just an Instagram page. Now it's across social media where I documented a bit about my life trying to be more sustainable. And that's where it all really came from. But very quickly, that turned into a bit more activism and campaigning. And so I started talking about sustainable tips and tricks, but very quickly turned more to how can we campaign for change that is bigger than just ourselves. And now I am a campaigner. So I do my PhD research. I'm an environmental scientist with that hat on, but I also do a lot of campaigning around climate, waste, fashion, travel, lots of these different topics. And that looks very different. So sometimes that looks like doing talks like Tech Fest. Other times it might be school talks or working with businesses. I also do a lot in the media. So there's a photograph there of me on Sky News. So I do lots on the radio and on the TV, almost like being a pundit, talking and commentating on environmental issues. And I also go to conferences. So these photographs, actually, both top one was when COP26, the United Nations Climate Summit, came to Glasgow, which is actually where I'm from. It's where I was born. And so I go to these conferences around the world. And actually, just next week, I will be heading off to COP29, which is in Baku, Azerbaijan. So I can answer any questions you might have about what it's like to go to these conferences if you're interested. But that's a little bit of how my work has progressed over the years. It's gone from sharing plastic free tips to now campaigning bigger changes. And sometimes that is involved in being in big groups. So this is a photograph in Westminster in London, where I was part of Tier Fund, a big global campaign against plastic. And other times it's like with many of these different colleagues that I have around the world, where we might be campaigning about climate finance, that's on the left hand side, or air pollution down at the bottom, or it might be with other young people in Scotland. That's the bottom right hand photo, is lots of other young people from Scotland with, at that time, he was the First Minister of Scotland, and we now have a new one. But, sometimes I'm campaigning as global, part of a global movement. But what I wanted to do today was talk to you about campaigning through the lens of the disposable vapes campaign that I've been running over the past 2 years. And this is something that started at the end of 2022. And I've learned so many lessons about campaigning that I'd love to share with you. But also throughout this, you will just learn more about this campaign in particular. And I think for Tech Fest to be highlighting this issue is super important, because this is a piece of technology. And on one hand, people might say this is innovation, but actually, this gives us something really important to think about when thinking about, in general, technology and innovation, because this is the kind of first mainstream disposable piece of technology. So, what I would love to do for the next 20-25 minutes or so is talk to you about the disposable vapes campaign, and hopefully you'll find that interesting. But of course, when we get to the discussion at the end, we can talk really about any of my work or the things that you're passionate about or questions that you have. But this will be the next bit. So I thought I would just start, in case anyone has never seen the insides of a disposable vape or know what we're talking about, answer the question, what is a disposable vape? So my friend Mark is a engineer down at UCL, and we authored a piece together with other scientists all around disposable electronics. But this is something that he did in his lab. He's the pro. He pulled apart a disposable vape to actually talk about what is inside, because you can see it at the top. Normally, it just comes in a packet, it's all in one piece. But actually, when you pull it apart, you see that these are very intricate and complex electronic items. So you have the outside, which is normally an aluminium tube, and it'll have colored paint on it. You then inside have a battery. It's a lithium ion battery with wires made of copper. That you've then got the different seals, which are made of rubber. You then have to have the solution, the nicotine solution, which is in a sponge soaked. And you have other bits of plastic that are there as well. And that normally all comes neatly packaged in the device. But if you were to pull it apart and see what's there, this is what you would get. So when we talk about a disposable vape, we're actually talking about a small electronic device. And the history is that vaping in general has been around for over 20 years. But it actually started with reusable, rechargeable, refillable devices, and they were normally a lot bigger than the disposables we see today. And it's a smoking cessation device. That's why it was started. However, they might not be as harmful as smoking, but they do still contain many different chemicals, including nicotine. And importantly, we don't actually have decades of science and research on the impacts of these. So we know they're slightly less bad than smoking, but we still don't really know the harms that they have on human health. And importantly, I think, is that disposable vapes and lots of vaping brands, many of them stem from the tobacco industry as a sort of evolution of that industry. And these are just some of the most popular brands of disposables. It'll vary country to country, and we have many more than just these three. And the photos that you will see on this presentation are pretty much all photos that I've taken of vapes that I have found as litter. And what I'm not going to have time to do is go through those health impacts of vaping in general and the disposable vapes, but I wanted to give a nod to the amazing work that has been done by the public health community, who have very much been a part of the campaign that we've been running around disposable vapes, particularly the call to ban them. But I wanted to just address the fact that there is a huge impact to health with vaping, particularly with young people and with non-smokers, and that there's a wealth of information out there. But what I would love to do is talk to you about the environmental issues. And these are going to be some of the points that I want to talk to you about. So there's quite a few. The first is this: there is a huge amount of waste associated with disposable vapes. And every single week in the UK, we throw away 5 million. Let's just let that number settle in. 5 million disposable vapes every single week are just thrown away. And inside each of those, thinking back to that image, there's a battery, there's wires, there's plastic, there's metal. So huge amount of waste. And that number actually quadrupled from 2022 to 2023 when Material Focus did their research. So this number is on the rise. And if you were to take particularly the lithium that's in the batteries and turn it into something else, you would be able to make about 5,000 electric cars in terms of the amount of lithium, in terms of the amount of batteries. So actually what's inside is a really precious resource that should be used for something better. Electric cars is just the example I gave, but lithium and copper and all of these elements are used in many other devices and should be not wasted and not thrown away after just one use. So one of the first big problems with disposable vapes is the amount of waste. The other problem is this: it's litter. We have seen litter on the rise when it comes to disposable vapes. And we have a great charity here in Scotland called Keep Scotland Beautiful. And they have just yesterday, or Thursday or Friday, I think it was yesterday, released their new statistics on litter in Scotland. And the number one fastest growing piece of litter in Scotland is disposable vapes, which is just crazy to think about. And these are all images of the vapes that I have found in my on walks around my streets. And these big plant pots are actually outside my parents' house from when they collect them as well. And the photograph that has sort of sand and a little sign is actually from the Victoria and Albert Museum in Dundee that had a plastics exhibition a couple of years ago, last year, sorry, 2023. And they got primary schools in Scotland to go on beach cleans, and they collected the litter and brought it into the museum and displayed it on this big beach sandbox to highlight the amount of litter that was on Scotland's beaches. And right there in the middle was a disposable vape, and that was found by one of the local schools on a beach in a place called Carnoustie. So vapes have a huge impact on the environment, and we are already seeing them on beaches, in parks, on the streets. And the one on the left was one that I'd found that actually had been run over by a car, and you could see all the insides had popped out. The paint was beginning to chip off, and that was obviously introducing microplastics into the environment. And this is another funny one, which is a sort of knock-on impact that we've seen, which is you might have walked past public bins and wondered what on earth are all these stickers that are appearing. And these stickers are actually from the bottom of disposable vapes. So when you open a new disposable vape, it has a sticker on the bottom that you have to peel off to start the device, and people then are sticking them to bins. And it just shows that there are all these knock-on effects that we're beginning to see. And councils are now having to spend money paying staff to clean bins to peel off all of these stickers because it obviously makes a mess. We don't want them to fall off and become microplastics. So it is just really interesting to see all the knock-on effects from just these one devices. But I also mentioned that I had found one that had been run over by a car, and you could see all the insides. And if I draw your attention to the left-hand side, you can see that these are all disposable vapes they're the same type, but they're all at different stages of being littered. So the one on the far left, probably was only dropped a few days before I found it, whereas the ones in the middle and towards the right are clearly vapes that have been dropped many, many days or weeks ago and have been battered and bruised by cars and by just the elements. And you can see that the paint is chipping off and becoming microplastics, but also you can see that as time goes on, particularly as they get run over, they get squashed and the batteries come out of them. And one thing that ends up happening is they basically end up becoming little shards of metal. And this guy is a gentleman who lives in Dundee, which is where I am based. And he got in touch with the local paper because we were doing lots of pieces about disposable vapes. And he said, I've got a story for you because he now has customers coming in regularly with popped tires because they have run over vapes. And that's what that image is at the top, is actually the inside of a tire where somebody has run over a vape. It is a shard of metal that then pops through their tire. So people are now having to spend hundreds of pounds getting new tires. And I was actually at a school a couple of weeks ago giving an assembly talking about disposable vapes, and a teacher came up to me at the end and said, I had to go to the garage and it was exactly that came out of my tire. I had no idea that was a vape. So all these knock-on effects because of one new piece of disposable technology that's being littered and causing problems. But interestingly, and this, from the science and technology point of view, we are putting batteries that technically could be recharged into non-chargeable devices. There's no way of charging single-use devices. And these photos were actually sent in by a guy in Scotland who had been doing his own project. So don't try this at home, but this is something that he is qualified to do. So he started to collect disposable vapes that he was finding as litter, and you can just see how many batteries he managed to collect from those. He was pulling them apart and carefully putting the batteries together and making battery packs. You can see some images here of the process involved. He then managed to collect so many disposable vapes, and you can see more images of how he was taking them apart. And he ended up making ginormous battery packs that were actually rechargeable. He then recharged these battery packs and took them with him on his electric bike. So you can see his electric bike there. And he was able to recharge his electric bike using battery packs that he had made. Now, he was trying to prove a point that we are taking precious resources, turning them into batteries, and instead of making them rechargeable, we are shoving them into a device that is single use and throwing them away. And that is such a waste. And I thought this is such a powerful example of the waste that is associated with the rise in disposable technology, often called fast technology. In the same way that we talk about fast fashion, we're now beginning to talk about fast technology, which I just think is a really interesting story. But also there is a harm to wildlife. So these photographs were from a local wildlife photographer who was taking images of a very normal behavior. This is birds, particularly marine animals, who pick up shellfish and drop them from a height to smash them open and get their lovely dinner. And he was taking photographs of this bird from quite far away, but it was trying to do this and it was struggling. And it wasn't until he got really, he had to really get his camera out and zoom quite far. But he realized that this bird was actually picking up a disposable vape, and that was what it was trying to smash open, thinking it was shellfish. So, although there isn't a huge record of the impact to wildlife, we do know that the toxic chemicals that are leaching into the environment, the microplastics, and now even marine birds who are dropping these, we are seeing that it is having an impact, which is just really sad and really, like, it's this kind of knock-on impact. But along the campaign, people have asked, why are you wanting to ban disposable vapes? Why aren't we just trying to get them recycled? Because we can recycle electronics, right? Why are we not trying to recycle them? Well, my answer to that would always be this. The first point is vapes are technically not 100% recyclable. So if we think back to the image, not every single part of the vape can be recycled. The sponge that's been soaked in nicotine solution is hazardous waste. That needs to be either landfilled or incinerated. Some of the plastic can't be recycled. Other bits and pieces might be able to be recycled, but not all of it can. So it's not 100% recyclable. So there's always going to be some waste, which is not great. The other point is vape recycling points are not accessible. And normally, when I'm doing assemblies or talks with people in person, I would normally ask people to do a show of hands. So I would normally say, put your hand up if you have seen a disposable vape for sale. And 100% of people normally would put their hand up because we've all seen disposable vapes for sale. I then ask people, have you ever seen a vape recycling bin? And normally you only get a few hands, 5% of people. And that's because the recycling points for vapes are not accessible, they're not widely available. And this leads on to the third point, which is actually in the UK anyway, we have waste regulations. They're called WEEE regulations, waste electronics and electrical equipment. And retailers should be providing these points but are failing to. And there was some research done by Material Focus, the same charity that looks at the waste, and they found that over 90% of vape retailers are failing to provide these bins. So they're not accessible. And also, we just don't have a proven track record. In the UK, we struggle to get general recycling of stuff that you can put outside your house, curbside. We struggle to get that above 50%. So to think that we would be good with these new technology, it's not really the best message. And interestingly, a lot of the ones that I've found as litter, they're so damaged that they can't be recycled anyway. And these images in the middle is actually from my university because I said to them, lots of people on campus will most likely be using disposable vapes. Can we please get these bins? So we got them put in. The top image was the first day we got them in, and I found a vape, so I put it in the bin. And then just a few days later, we already had, probably about 50 vapes in them. So people clearly want to do the right thing, but if they don't have the bins, they are just going to chuck them away with whatever other waste stream. But interestingly, I went on a site visit to the only place in Scotland that recycles vapes. So this is a place called Optimum Eco in Irvine, and they recycle vapes. And I went for a trip to go and see how it happens. And this is a few photographs from the process. And to recycle a vape, what you have to do is you have to have a staff member. They had two staff members doing this in PPE with gloves and glasses and all sorts. In one of those big sort of when you were in chemistry and you had one of the big extractor hubs that you had to kind of do fumigation hubs. So these kind of places that you would do your experiments, they had to be doing the process inside. And so the first step was taking the disposable vape apart. So you can see there in that image on the left, they were taking apart these orange ones. So I guess there was a step before, which is they need to be sorted into their different types. So they were being pulled apart. So the tubes were being taken apart, the batteries were being taken out, the wires had to be cut, all the different things had to be put in the different bins. And some of this was obviously general waste, other bits could be recycled. And it was a very long process because it had to carefully be taken apart, particularly with the battery. The wires had to be cut, and then they had to put special tape over the battery to make sure that the remaining kind of nubs of the wires wouldn't short. So it was a kind of special tape that had to be put around it. They had to then be put in a bin that meant that it had kind of flame retardant things in it so that it wouldn't catch fire. And each vape took a couple of minutes, 5 to 10 minutes to properly take apart. And some of them are really tricky because the models are all different. And if you imagine every single vape in Scotland that gets thrown away having to go through this process, we're talking millions and millions of vapes every single year. We just don't have the capacity. And interestingly, when I went to this facility, I kind of said, why are you showing me this? Because you are a company that recycles electronics for a profit. Why are you showing me this process? Because I'm seeing that this is really labor intensive, and it just shows why recycling vapes is not the answer. And they said, because we agree with you, this is actually very time consuming. It's not cost effective. It's not something that we want to become a regular stream. The only reason we do it is because we believe somebody has to do it. There's a responsibility to do it. And I thought that was really interesting. So, recycling vapes is not the answer because it's not easy, it's time consuming, and it's not cost effective. And my university, who put in those bins, has to pay to get those recycled, even though they're not the ones selling it. So, it's not a good system. But for any of you who maybe did chemistry at school and know your science, we also know that lithium batteries are an extreme fire hazard. And this is something that we are seeing as a growing issue. So, Material Focus, I've mentioned them a few times, also did research looking at fires and found that more than 700 fires between 2022 and 2023, when they did their research in bin lorries and recycling centres, were caused by vape batteries. And that's because when you have a lithium battery that gets damaged, whether that is squashed or comes into contact with water, it can ignite. And that is something that we have seen becoming a real problem. And this photograph was actually from Angus Council, who had to empty a whole recycling truck full of paper and cardboard because something had caught fire, and they had to pull it off the road and dump it into this nearby car park. And inside, they found a vape lithium battery that had caught fire. And that is the problem. And we have seen devastating fires in homes, in bins, and at recycling centres because of lithium batteries. And sometimes it's so devastating you can't tell if it was a vape or if it was something else. But what we know is that if you had a graph that showed the rise in disposable vapes and the rise in lithium battery fires, you can definitely draw some conclusions that these tiny little devices that have got these big explosive batteries in them are absolutely having an impact. And one of the final things is we know that disposable vapes are also perpetuating disposable consumerism, where we buy stuff and then throw it away. And that can be called a linear economy. And a linear economy is anything, any object, when we pull resources out of the earth, we make it into a product and we just use it once or a few times and then throw it away. That can be anything from fast fashion through to disposable technology. And in Scotland, in the UK, and really around the world, we need to move to a circular economy where we don't throw things away after just a few uses. Recycling is obviously a bit better because we might be able to salvage some of the materials, but there is always a bit of waste. What we want is a circular economy where technology is reused time and time again. And that's actually taking you back to one of the first few slides where vaping began. It began as a rechargeable, refillable device that was reusable. But because of convenience and better profit margins for companies, we have ended up with disposables. And so I think it's important to consider that we want to move towards a circular economy. And so we want people to move away. And disposable technology is now on the rise, and the vapes have been the leader of that. And so that's something we want to consider. So, what has the campaign looked like as a bit of a campaigning perspective? Well, it was grassroots. It started with me sending out social media, tweets and Instagram posts and TikToks at the end of 2022. And very quickly, different organizations, from environmental organizations through to public health organizations, got behind and said, let's do something about it. One of the most interesting campaigning lessons I learned was grassroots can be really powerful. So I got in touch with all of the councils here in Scotland. We have 32 local authorities in Scotland, and I asked the councillors here in Scotland to consider this issue and support a ban. Now, councils can't ban things themselves, but they can ask the government to do it for them. And across pretty much a year, maybe a bit less, we had 29 out of the 32 Scottish councils support a ban. So they wrote to the government and said, we want you to take action, which is phenomenal and really hardly ever happens. We don't often have councils doing things like this. We had the Scottish government who put out a review, and then that led to a UK government consultation in 2023 last year. So that was just fantastic. And you can see some of the amazing councils that have been involved. And it was really great to spend time with counsellors, talking to them about this issue from both the environment, health, and young people's angles. And for anyone who is very eagle eyed, you also might have spotted that there is someone in there that's not a council, but it's the Scottish Youth Parliament. And that's because the Scottish Youth Parliament also took this on as their own issue. And I helped some of the members of the Scottish Youth Parliament create this, which is their own consultation. And they got some of the highest number of responses ever, 702. And they were asking young people in Scotland, what do we need to do? And almost three quarters, so 73% of young people believed that a ban, a complete ban, would be the most effective way of combating the environmental issues. So it was great to have young people speaking to young people in Scotland about this. And what has happened is we have had a successful campaign. So it was actually in under 500 days from the first time I tweeted about disposable vapes being an issue to the day that the last UK government, so the Conservatives, announced that they were going to ban it. It was under 500 days that we got that, which is amazing. So these are a couple of the kind of snapshots of things we've heard. So disposable vapes are going to be banned in the UK next year, which is fantastic. In Scotland, it's going to happen on the 1st of April. And in the rest of the UK, it's going to be the 1st of June. And the 1st of June date was just confirmed a couple of days ago, which was fantastic. So, a real win for grassroots campaigning in terms of chipping away, raising an issue, talking about it on social media, on the TV, on the radio, and getting councils and members of the parliament involved. It was really fantastic. But there, there's been challenges along the way and definitely a lot of lessons learned. But this is one of the fantastic things. One of the things we have had to combat, which I think is interesting, is greenwashing. So we have been doing so much campaigning. We've done loads of stuff on social media, getting people to show the vapes that they've found litter picking and on beach cleans. It's been fantastic. But one of the things that we saw was a response from the vaping industry where vaping companies started putting out these adverts that you can see on the right hand side, misleading people. So this was Elf Bar, one of the main companies, and they put out this advert which said recycling for a greener future, green awareness, which doesn't really mean anything, doesn't really tell people what they're supposed to do, doesn't really give much more information, and it's quite misleading. And it's what we call greenwashing, which is where companies tell lies or twist the truth to try and make themselves look more sustainable. And in the UK, we've got a fantastic organisation called the Advertising Standards Authority. And you can report when companies, organisations do adverts that you think are misleading. It could be on the radio, on the TV, or like this, it can be something that you've seen on social media, or it can be something that you've seen on the side of a bus. And we reported these adverts to the ASA, who did their own investigation and agreed with us, which is fantastic, and said, absolutely, this is greenwashing and this is not allowed. And it meant that there was now a bar set where disposable vaping companies were not allowed to promote themselves as sustainable, because otherwise they would get pulled up and that would be an issue. So that is fantastic in terms of being able to advocate for sustainability and not let companies greenwash. And also, one of the things that has been interesting is as a campaigner, I do a lot of correspondence with the government. So that might be ministers, MPs, MSPs, the government, different bodies. And obviously, all of that correspondence can be put in as a freedom of information request. And so I actually got all of my correspondence requested from the Scottish government. Somebody was looking for it. And so I think that was just a real lesson for me, that we were onto something good because people were wanting to know what we were talking to the government about. But also that I'm really glad all of my correspondence, my emails, my meetings were factually correct, full of science, full of research, because otherwise I would have got myself in trouble. But really that showed to me there's people, nobody will know, we don't know who put in this request, but it's always interesting to see the behind the scenes of what campaigning leads to. And so hopefully you found that helpful to hear a little bit more about the campaign. But I just wanted to show you, this is just the final slide, which is, that is the tweet that I sent out at the end of 2022. It was around this time, October time in 2022. And that was my first tweet where I just said, I'm sick of litter picking these vapes. And actually, my dog had picked one up. So I was saying, and I had to get one out of his mouth. I want to campaign against these. They shouldn't be disposable. There's precious metals and harmful contents. And, not even to mention the health impact. Who's with me? And after that tweet, it went viral. I had so many people getting in touch saying, I want to be part of this. And really, we just took every day, every week, every month as it came. And we did lots on social media, lots of contacting our local councillors and built up a campaign. There's no perfect template for how to do a campaign because every campaign will look slightly different, but we learned lessons and we did it unique to us. And so for me, going out litter picking, taking photos and videos was one of the key things that I did. And it was unique because it was what I loved to do and it was creative and it showed it in a different way. But each campaign will be different. But I think it was great to know that that tweet sparked the fire that got so many different people and organizations and politicians and now has ended up with a campaign win of legislative change that's coming, which is obviously just fantastic. So I'll stop sharing my screen there because hopefully that has been interesting. I don't want to talk at you for the whole hour. But hopefully that's been interesting, I guess, to see a lot of the behind the scenes of what a campaign looks like, or some of even just what the disposable vapes campaign involved. Because actually, along the way, we had people coming and telling us stories, whether it was the guy from the car garage or whether it was teachers talking to us about schools, or, actually, it was just fantastic. So I'll stop there. I'll give myself a chance to catch my breath, but also, I can have a look as well and see that, there's a couple of comments and things. So I'll take a look at those in the chat. But Wendy, I don't know if you want to kind of host this next bit and see anything, but I'll have a look through the chat as well because I can now see that.
Absolutely. I can, Laura, I mean, thank you so much. You can see how passionate you are about this. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably what's gathered everybody to come with you. And congratulations on being successful and getting not only a Scottish ban, but a whole
Oh
UK ban.
yeah.
So, that certainly explains why you are the Scottish influencer of 2024. So that's amazing. Quite a bit of interest in the chat. So I'll just
Yeah.
read out the questions for you. So Sandra has asked, I've heard manufacturers of vapes arguing that the size of the vapes could be increased to 10 millilitres, so about 5 times what they're allowed to move now.
Yeah.
So that would save on batteries and increase the cost to make it difficult for young people to buy. But what response would you give to them?
Do you know, and I think actually that is a really, really good point because the disposable vapes, they are a problem for a reason, which is they're obviously disposable, so they just get chucked away. There's no way of recharging them or refilling them. So even if they were, if they were rechargeable and refillable, that would be great. And actually, I kind of agree that if it was a bit bigger, they would be thrown away at a less frequent point. However, something that's been really interesting to chat to, particularly people on the health side, has been, and this is caveat, not promoting smoking here at all. However, if you imagine a packet of cigarettes, 10, 20, whatever's inside it, most likely you would go outside, take out one cigarette, light it, smoke it, and then be finished. Go inside and carry on your day. And you might do that multiple times throughout the day. But there's a very clear beginning and end point. One of the problems with disposable vapes is that it's not portioned in the same way. There's no beginning and end point because inside a disposable vape, there is multiple cigarettes worth of vaping. So, one of the things they were finding is that in a disposable vape, you've got multiple packets of cigarettes, if we use that analogy, but there's no way of telling when you've had enough unless you're really good at counting how many puffs you're having. So we were finding that some people were vaping one whole disposable vape in a day when it really should be lasting about a week. And so actually, if we were to make the tank bigger or allow more liquid, the danger might be that people have even more of this product in one day because it's really, really difficult to portion. And certainly speaking to people who have quit smoking and have started vaping, they have found that actually quitting the vaping is equally, if not more difficult, because the nicotine intake can be a lot higher because of this. So there's all these really difficult nuances that you need to navigate with it, which can be quite difficult because on one hand you think a bigger tank means less times that you need to refill it or less bottles needed or less times throwing it away. But the knock-on effect can be people have way more nicotine in a day and they're vaping more because it lasts longer. So it can be really, really difficult. But I do agree it needs to be out of the price point of young people. And actually, the disposable vapes are getting banned, which is great. And in the budget of the UK government, which was just out on Wednesday, vape liquids are now getting taxed at a much higher rate. So will be more expensive. So we'll hopefully tip it out of that pocket money bracket, which is what we want to do with youth vaping. So I think it's hard because the answers to all of this is really nuanced and you have to have this balanced view. But being aware of it is the most important thing. So at least we can make an informed choice. But I think that would be my answer is that kind of, I can absolutely see the argument for making these things bigger in terms of the environmental impact, but the health impact probably would be even more devastating than it has been so far.
And I guess there's not enough research on the long-term health impacts at the moment.
Yeah, and interestingly, so there are no long-term studies on vaping because vaping has only been around for 20 years and we didn't start research when they were launched 20 years ago. Whereas with smoking, we have people who have smoked their whole life, 60, 70, 80 years, and we've got data on that. And with vaping, we just don't. And interestingly, Abertay University, alongside other universities and the NHS Tayside region, was trying to do research and is doing research on passive vaping. So, not even impacts to your own health, but to people around you. And they were really struggling to get participants to take up this as a research study. And I think partly because people feel, and you can understand it, they're thinking, well, actually, this helped me quit smoking. So I kind of don't want to know if it's bad because I got off smoking and so it's even difficult to get that. And one of the other things that we're finding is actually people are using disposable vapes while still smoking. So it's also difficult because there isn't a really clear cut way of saying, right, I am now not a smoker, because actually people kind of dabble in between them all, or people sometimes don't even know how much. Because in a way, if you talk to somebody who smokes or used to smoke, often they say, oh, I smoked 20 a day, 30 a day, 40 a day. But if you have this disposable vape, how do you know how much you're having? Are you having one a day, half a day, a quarter a day, two a day? It's really hard to quantify it in the same way as smoking, which was a very regimented way of measuring it.
Okay, thank you. It's quite scary as to where we
Oh,
might
yeah.
go. So I have another question from Yvonne, and she's asked, do you have any other campaigns running currently?
Yeah. So personally, in terms of ones I'm leading, definitely not leading any like the disposable vapes has. But there's lots of other campaigns happening at the moment. Some are quite formal. So, for example, there is a consultation out at the moment around disposable cups. So, your kind of coffee cups and tea cups. So, there's a bit of campaigning around that, trying to get people to respond to a government consultation. It's not the most interesting thing in the world, but it's of course, very important that we raise awareness for that particular type of waste. So that's always great. And I do work with other charities as well to kind of highlight issues. Another big issue that's on the rise is wet wipes, plastic wet wipes. And there's two parts to this. Well, kind of three parts. First part is they are single-use plastic. We should try and avoid them. The other point is people are flushing them down the toilet and we're getting blockages and that's causing real issues. And the third part is we also have a water system that is not up to scratch and we're getting sewage overflows, spills into the environment, and then these wet wipes are coming out with that and polluting beaches. So wet wipes is something I'm definitely passionate about looking at. The disposable cups is something that's on the rise. And there's a few other issues that I guess I'm looking to see what we could do around the kind of issues. And quite often as well, people come to me and say, I'm really passionate about this. Any chance you can help out? So I'm quite passionate about artificial grass and how we can try and avoid that for flooding, localized flooding, and plastic. Somebody came to me with a big thing around tires, that used tires are a huge kind of piece of waste that we don't really know what to do with. There's not many innovative ways of getting rid of them. So, how can we do something a bit better with that? So, there's always little things that I'm involved in. And sometimes it's global campaigns, and you're just one kind of little cog, a little wheel. And other times it's things that you can actually kind of spark in terms of, trying to do it. There's a campaign I'm trying desperately to do is at Abertay University. If you go to our cafe, we've got one cafe on campus. They only sell takeaway coffee. You can't get a mug. You can't sit with a mug. Like, they don't have them. So that's like a mini campaign that I'm trying to do on campus, which is so small, but it's like every little helps. So lots of different things always bubbling away. But it's interesting. And I think as well, just as a sort of general comment, in the UK anyway, we do have a new government, and partly it's kind of seeing where the land lies with that, and seeing what policies they might be coming out with, because that's another part of campaigning, is giving governments the chance to see what happens. So yeah, lots of little things.
So plenty, sadly, plenty to keep you busy.
Oh, I mean, my whole job is trying to get myself out of a job, trying to work so hard that we don't need to have people doing this kind of role.
So you mentioned there about some people coming to you that are passionate about things. What advice would you give to a young person who's thinking about becoming an influencer for positive change?
Oh, yeah. So many things. And actually, the first thing is just about having conversations, because as soon as you start talking to people about what you're passionate about or a problem that you want to solve, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how many avenues just open up. And so I would recommend talking to people. And the key people I would kind of start with is think about who's around you who might be able to help you get something started. So it might be someone in your immediate family. It might be if you're at school or college or in a workplace, is there people in there, any sort of eco group? If it's an environmental issue, an eco group or any sort of pupil leadership team, or is there a sustainability team at your work, anything like that? And then probably one of the biggest things I would say, well, social media is a huge part of this as well. And I know not everyone is confident with social media, but it's such a great platform to just start. And that's how I started in terms of gathering people. But probably the most important person or people is the people that represent you. And so, being in Scotland, you've got your local councillors, your members of the Scottish Parliament, your members of Parliament, and you will have your member of the Youth Parliament. And those are not just four people, that's four types of people. There's multiples of each that you can contact. And they are literally paid to represent us. That is their job, is to represent our needs. And I was blown away by the support that all of these different groups gave to the campaign that I did. And the best part is you can email them. You don't need to physically go and meet them. You can, and I would recommend it if they've got a surgery on or they have a drop in. Like, it's great to get familiar and meet them, but you can email them. It's so quick. And when I emailed all of the councillors in Scotland, I did it all in one evening, literally one evening. I just sat and emailed them all. And you can get their emails from just Google your local authority, councillors, and you can find them all. And you don't always need to come with a solution. You can go with a problem. You don't need to say, I've gone through all the work and here's my research. You can just say to them, look, I'm really passionate about this issue. Can I have a conversation with you? And they might have a Zoom call. They might ask to meet with you. They might come into your school or your workplace. So definitely do that. And the thing that I loved is that they then go on and champion that issue for you and take that workload off you, which was amazing. So I had councillors in Scotland across every party. So it wasn't just one political party that supported it, it was all of them and the independents. And it was just fantastic. So that would be my advice, is like, start those conversations. And the other thing would just be, and see if there's any organizations out there. So for me, Keep Scotland Beautiful, the Marine Conservation Society, Ash Scotland. There were so many other organisations who were passionate, and they have staff who, because I did all of this out of my spare time. Like, I basically did it as a volunteer, right? But being able to get your elected representatives and people in charities who are obviously salaried and can help that way was amazing. And the support was just fantastic.
And I guess it's really important, a lot of those organisations, and you mentioned yourself about going into schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was, I've had great opportunity to go and share this. So I've done, back-to-back assemblies at all sorts of schools, primary, secondary, and talk about these issues. And I think it's been super, super important. And it's been great to have that invitation, from schools, and from teachers and head teachers and all sorts who see this as a problem, but also want to get you in to help. And it's been great to see schools being able to then champion their own issues as well.
And there's another fantastic question just popped up in the chat here. So Siobhan asking, can I ask for some advice? I was putting tea bags in the food waste for composting, thinking they're made of paper, and I know I do,
Yeah.
so that they would compost, but then she's read that they might contain plastic.
Yeah, and I think the only advice would be check the packaging as carefully as possible, because you can get ones that have no plastic, and that's the kind of the best advice. And then second to that is check if it's a compostable material, because here's a caveat. There is a lot of products now coming out called bioplastics or compostable, and it's a bit greenwashing, because if you chuck it in a general bin or put it in your garden, it probably won't compost because it needs to be specially composted at a facility. But quite often these compostable tea bags are, because it's being sent off to your council's composting facility. So I would check packaging as closely as possible and get plastic free ones, which is obviously fantastic. Or you could go back to what my granny taught me, which is get loose leaf, which is obviously another option. So I do still have tea bags occasionally, but I've also got loose leaf and a little loose leaf tea bag and a wee strainer. So that's always an option as well. It's funny, the first time I did it, my granddad, I was having a cup of tea and he said, that's what, because he used to work in the kind of factories in Dundee, and he said, you could always tell the older staff from the younger staff, because the older staff would always leave a gulp of tea at the bottom of their cup, even though tea bags were a thing, because they remember the days of loose leaf where you would always have a mouthful of leaves at the end. So loose leaf would always be the kind of best option for avoiding it completely. But plastic free ones, if it says on the packaging, if it's compostable. But normally the compostable ones are fine. In your food waste bin would be the my advice for that. But you can also do sorry, another thing that people might find interesting is if you Google this, or I can maybe put the link in, is the big compost experiment. So this is University College London have an amazing long-term piece of research all about composting. It's fascinating. And what they get people to do is it's citizen science. So they get people to compost things at home in their own compost bins. And I think it's maybe every 6 months, they ask them to go sort of have a dig around and send photographs and images of what they've been putting in. And they've asked people to put in compostable carrier bags, compostable coffee cups, and tea bags. And they ask people to be, because what they're wanting to do is actually prove, are these things compostable, particularly at home, is the kind of thing they're looking at. So University College London, the big compost experiment, is a fascinating piece of research, and it's ongoing. It's really, and it's something people can get involved in as well if they're interested. But it's quite interesting to see over the months and years how things break down, or do they break down, is the question. So definitely look out for that.
Yeah, that's great. We'll try and put that in the chat with when
Oh yeah,
we post the video. That'd be fantastic. And
yeah.
obviously, we're always really interested from our speakers as the background and what drove you to be passionate. So, when did you decide that you wanted to become an environmental scientist?
And to be honest, I think going back to school, when I was in high school, I had not a Scooby what I wanted to do. And I thought, I really love geography. So I'll just keep doing that as part of my subjects, and I'll see what happens at the other end. So I did it when I was at school, it was an intermediate two, which now would be a Nat 4 or a Nat 5. I then did it as a higher, and I then did it as an advanced higher because I stayed on in 6 year. And I remember when I was at school, after thinking about what I would do, and I thought, I love geography so much. I just want to keep learning about it. And so I picked that to do it at university. And I wasn't really sure what my job would be, because there's so many different jobs out there. But I think definitely I would recommend, and actually Skills Development Scotland have got their kind of careers, my world of work resource kind of
Mhm.
week coming up. And so I would recommend, speak to your careers advisor at school, speak to your teachers if you've got a subject you're passionate about, and also check out some of these resources, because that's what I did. I actually just started looking around at what were green jobs, I guess is what we would call them. And so for a few years after leaving university, I worked for a charity, like an international charity that looked at climate impacts on people, and the environment, and what we could do. And it was a kind of campaigning organization. I also did an internship with an energy company in Scotland and looked at how they could reduce their waste and what that kind of how that fit into net zero. And then I went back into research because I found a project that I was passionate about. But actually, it was great to learn about different jobs. And that's probably the best advice is, if there's something you're passionate about. So for me, it was just geography, but like follow it as far as you can, ask for advice and see what jobs are out there. And I think nowadays as well, a great interesting place to look is LinkedIn, which is a sort of professional social media page, but you can actually see what people do for a living, and you can also see what their career path has been, because it's quite nice to see. Because for me, so my mum and dad, my dad just retired this week, which is very exciting. But my mum and dad have both worked in the same jobs at the same place for 30 years. So for me leaving school, I thought, I need to pick a job that I'm going to be in for the rest of my life. But now I've been in more jobs than my mum and dad combined. So it's okay to have a different career path or do a portfolio of things. But actually, it's quite nice to go on LinkedIn and see what people have done, see their paths, and see how they maybe progress in a really obvious way, or they might chop and change through different routes. And I think that's quite nice to see how that all fits together. And that's obviously publicly available. You can see that online, which is a great resource.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the impact of climate change on nations there. So how effective have you found that the COP forums are?
Yeah. One thing is there was an interesting graph that I once saw, which was the sort of progression of each COP. So the one that's about to be in Azerbaijan is COP 29. So it's the 29th time it's happened. It's happened more times than I've been alive. So that's one way of looking at it. But also there was this graph that showed every time it happened, but it also showed that globally we're still seeing an increase in global warming and climate change. I think one argument is if we didn't have these negotiations globally where countries come together, we would be in a lot worse of a state.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you could say, well, is it useful at all because we're still seeing climate change? I think I sit somewhere in the middle, because actually there are things that have come out of it that we never would have had, in terms of support for countries, whether it's financial or with innovative renewable energy technology, or these different policies. So I always think we're better having it than not having it, but it's definitely not a perfect solution or a perfect fit, and we need to try and campaign to change it as well. And I would say one of the biggest things that I would change about it is this idea of conflict of interest, because particularly last year when it was in Dubai, there was a lot of fossil fuel influence, and we're at a conference where we're trying to move away from fossil fuels to greener, cleaner energy. And actually the conflict of interest was was right at the surface. And so I think that's something that I would first and foremost change, is actually there needs to be some big way of declaring your interests and making sure that you don't unduly influence the negotiations. But absolutely, there's some great things. And the biggest thing is loss and damage financing. So that's for countries that have been devastated by climate change. Now we are finally getting that money to those countries from the countries that are the biggest contributors, which is places like us in the States and China. And, we're getting that finance there, which is important. So there is small things that are, well, big things that are glimmers of hope, but definitely not a perfect process.
Excellent. Laura, thank you very much. If anyone else has any last minute questions that you want to stick in the chat, then please do those. It's just popped up in the chat now. This is the first time we've done a full-on digital science festival, and Laura, thank you for being part of the
Well,
very
thank
first
you.
one, and we hope to welcome you back again. So we really would welcome your feedback. So please take the time to click on the link. We will send it on to you afterwards as well, and pass that on back to us. If you have enjoyed this evening, and I can't see why you wouldn't, then please do join us for the rest of the week. If anyone wants to sign up, we've got an amazing lady, Dr. Vivian Iving tomorrow, who has designed all sorts of things for the greater good. She's joining us from, she's actually over in the Netherlands from the US, so she'll be there tomorrow night. And then, we talked a little bit about electric cars and things earlier on. We have next Friday, we have John Brown, who can tell you all the conspiracy theories there are about our use of artificial intelligence. So please, for those of you, if you enjoyed this, look at the rest of the programme and sign up for some of the activities. But thank you to everyone for joining us. And Laura, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you for
this
having me.
evening.
No, thanks for having me. It's been great. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone. Oh, I can see all the thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.